Monumental. That is the theme, and we're going to welcome our speaker, this really cool girl, Xtiana. And just so she doesn't have to speak over her photo the whole time, we'll go back to Monumental just for you. I mean, if you want the inception of the double face, but we're welcoming Xtiana to the stage. She runs Radical Brew and has so much to say. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, first and foremost, thanks to everybody who wants to come out on an early Friday morning. It's cold and rainy, which is like double awful, not my favorite, but I think it's pretty cool that we're here. And like Christy and I were talking last week kind of about, I think it's very telling of the people who show up on a Friday morning to do something like this, whatever the speaker's talking about. So obviously you're probably like really great people is what I gather, what I'm saying in my head. So yeah, I own Radicalized Brew, and I'm not trying to play the layman role, but don't think of me as a business owner. Like I own a business because legally it has to be registered as a business. Legally and ethically, I can't, make money and give money and do all these things unless I'm registered some way, So I'm a person who happens to own a business because I have to. Okay. So there's a lot of context that goes into like starting this business. I've never been a person who wanted to own their own business. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos of people though who work for themselves, and I've always really liked that. I thought that was cool. But yeah, I've never been a person who wants to own a business. It's just never been something that's interested me, right? Like I am all for joining a cause that already exists or working a job that already exists. And I've always been that way. And kind of going along with the theme, I'm not going to say monumental like every 5 lines because I think that'd be kind of corny. But the overall like theme being monumental, my story has a lot to do with no longer playing small, right? Doing something big, monumental, perhaps. And before all of these things took place to start Radicalized Brew, I was living a very, I'll say like stable, safe, secure, minimal risk life. I was making really good money. I was working in the coffee world. I was like a salary manager. It was very predictable, very safe. My rent was always going to be paid. There weren't very many hard times. Like many of us, everybody probably on the globe, except for like maybe 5 people who live like in remote places alone, 2020 was a challenging year for so many people for so many reasons. And I had a lot of stuff personally that took place just to like add on to it. But what took place in 2020 was a lot of very challenging events that I always say, like, there's a great book, Broken Open, but it broke me open to start doing big things and to give up like playing small and start taking risks. So obviously there's a pandemic that started in 2020. That was like a pretty big deal. Yeah. And like I said, I was working, things were great. I was making money. It was a wonderful time, and I'm immunocompromised. My job was like, go home to your family in St. Louis so you can be safe and you'll still get paid. It was a great time. It was like the happiest time in like 3 years. Anyways, but yeah, so when I came back, I'm still working. And this was around the time when the first protest happened after George Floyd was killed. And at the time I had to work, and the job I was at, they were very supportive. And they were like, I saw you're going to that march, blah, blah, blah. And I had to work that day. And they're like, what if we just close down the store so you can go and any of your baristas want to go or anything like that? So I'm like, great. I show up like I'm going to like a fair, like I have a sign, you know what I mean? Like I'm there for the right reasons. And that night there wasn't fair activities. Okay. It was a wild night. Okay. Like it was a transformative night. And that was the last time I ever showed up to a protest with like just my phone, just like assuming I'm going to be able to just head out afterwards and everything, and drive home. And, but like, there's a lot of funny parts and a lot of not so funny parts, but to sum up what was taking place in 2020, that was such a challenging time for me to constantly see these images and everything that was going on. Like, and it was really wearing on me, I think, before I even realized how much it was affecting me. And I remember my district manager and another manager had pulled me aside, and they were basically like, if you need to take this time off, like take some time off. Like, and if you wake up one day and you're like, hey, I need to take this day off, you just let us know and we'll make sure things are okay. And I was showing up to protests and things like that. But I am I'll say a recovering workaholic. Okay. Very much, we don't take vacations, no days off, work, work, work. Whatever's going on in the world, I can't let that affect me. Maybe you've experienced it. It doesn't work at all. It's usually worse if you do that than it would be if you just took breaks. But yes, I woke up one day and I went to work, and that was like the most challenging day of work. And I was just not present, right? I'm thinking about all these things that are going on in the world and stuff. And I got off work and I'd gone to a protest. And I remember driving by what some may call Legislative Plaza. I call it the People's Plaza, but right outside of the Tennessee State Capitol. And there was somebody there, and they had a sign, and it said something like, we've been here for 3 days, blah, blah, blah. And these are the things we're calling on Bill Lee to talk to us about. And I remember being like, 3 days, you know what I mean? Like, and it's in the middle of the summer. And at this point, I was not in a position to really show up like I wanted to. But I pulled up and I was like, hey, do you guys want me to get you like a case of water or something? And they're like, yeah, can you get us like a case of water and some snacks? I'm like, sure, So I'm like heading to Target, and I posted a status on Facebook. And I really feel like this is like the first of like a series of endless events that took place for radicalized brew to happen. But there's so much that led up to that. So I post a status, and I've never like posted a status before that's like, hey, if you guys want to Venmo me for this cause, which worked out that I had never done that before. So I posted, and I'm like, hey, there's some people who have been outside of the Capitol for 3 days. They're asking to talk to Governor Lee about removing these racist statues and to do all these different things that I think are important. This is my Venmo. If you want to send a couple bucks, I'm going to get them some water. So I get to Target, and I have like $100 in my Venmo already. And I'm like, oh, game changer. I don't know what they want with this. So I get like water, and I think I got like popsicles or something, and brought it back. And to kind of fast forward, I think it was like 4 days later, I had like $2,000 in my Venmo account. So now I'm like, oh, I guess like I have to keep coming back, right? This isn't my money. I need to figure out what they want. And I would just show up and be like, my name's Xtiana. Like, this is my phone number. If you need anything, text me and I'll show up with it, And like, I'd get texts from like random phone numbers, and they're like, can you bring us? And I'm like, I sure can, I'm sure they were a little suspicious, as they should be. But around this time too, things were like really weighing on me. And I woke up one morning and I texted my store manager, and I said, like, I think I'm going to take my vacation time, which was a lot because I don't take vacations. Okay. So I was like, I think I'm just going to take my vacation time. And I started showing up at this plaza like every single day. And as social as I am, I was like, it was like nerve wracking, right? I'm like, this is a major thing. But because I had this money, I had to keep talking to people and say, what do we need? Like, do we need markers for signs and stuff like that? And I did what I was taught to do, is that like, see how I can help. And I ended up like meeting some people, and we'd serve 3 meals every single day on that plaza. We had a community meeting every single night on the plaza. And every single night we'd have a direct action, whatever that may be. And there's so much that took place during this time that I could probably talk for like 8 hours. So I'll try and condense it down because I know I don't have 8 hours. But yeah, so these things are taking place. And from day one, the goal was calling on Governor Lee saying, hey, more than anything, we just want to sit down and talk. And I don't know if everybody knows, but before the plaza even started, some people got together and like wrote some emails and made some phone calls. It wasn't like we just showed up at the Capitol, like, can we talk to you? And nothing ever happened. And because there was no response, we made like a list of demands, like I said, that talked about like removing these racist statues and sitting down and having a conversation about what's going on in our city. And what started off as just a small group of people grew to a pretty insanely large things. And if you've seen like pictures or anything from it, there were some nights when there was like well over 100 folks down there, and it was 24 hours a day. And yeah, so I got to start using my voice in a little way. And I think, just based on how I was raised and things like that, my parents have always very much been like, stand up, do what's right, help people. But I've always been a person who like shows up when opportunity calls. I've never been a person to create opportunity. It's like, oh, there's a volunteer event, there's a protest, I'll show up. But I'm never the person who's going to say, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, or I'm going to start this. And I think that's a lot of like what came out of 2020. And like I said, there's dozens of stories that like took place at this plaza that I'll never have the time to tell, that I'm like still processing because it wasn't all good times. There's a lot of really challenging times. And quite a bit of pushback, not only from like Tennessee Highway Patrol and Governor Lee, but just from the general public, and we had lots of people who would stop by to let us know what they thought, and a lot of like really unsafe situations. And I say that because I think like after this trial, dealing with the murder of George Floyd, and even just recently with like them deciding that like his civil rights were violated, and like the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue coming out of the Capitol, it's easy to look back at the plaza and be like, oh, they were doing the right thing, but at the time, that was not the vibe. There was lots of people who felt very strongly about what we were doing, and went above and beyond to let us know that what we were doing was wrong to them. And I just think that's so important when we look at history and things like that. We think about like Martin Luther King, or even with John Lewis, like we were saying, we look back on these times in history and we're like, wow, they were doing such great things. But the reality is oftentimes during that moment, most people were not in support of them. And that kind of goes along like with that quote on the print that Christy mentioned about like good trouble and necessary trouble, and like taking a chance to stand up in a time where everybody's pushing against you and deciding like, I'm going to do this and like stir up this trouble because I know it's the right thing, and if we look at history, there are many times where laws were put in place that were not ethical and were not moral, and it took a lot of people to stand up against those and go against those and be troublemakers, like so many people would say. But like, here we are, right? And there's much progress to go, but there are a lot of people that I think we need to be grateful for. And like I always talk about like the removal of these statues and stuff. And I think it's so important to know that like while the plaza was a very big thing in our time and in our lives, and especially the people at the plaza, it was like just one like piece of the puzzle. And like many people don't know like how many elders and how many people have been fighting to get this statue taken out of the state capitol for decades, and all of this. And then George Floyd and everything really just came to a head in 2020. And it was kind of like the opportunity was right. And I feel like as a society, right, like each generation gets a baton, right? And we do what we want with that. And we're going to see how can we advance society as much as possible for the next generation, whether we're having children or not. What can I do on my time on earth to get society just a little bit further along? So when I leave and I pass it on to the Gen Z or whoever, you know what I mean? That it's in good hands. I feel like it is in good hands. Maybe I'm biased. I don't know. I didn't have anybody Gen Z in my life prior to 2020, but I'm like, I think they're like doing great. Shout outs to Gen Z. But yeah, so during this time, a lot of people were getting arrested. And I remember on 4th of July getting ready for this protest. And I was scared because of counter protests, because of threats that we were getting and things like that. I was not afraid of like getting arrested or anything like that. I'm like, please just don't have anybody like too wild, too unhinged show up to this plaza, right? And it's like, I wish it was this crazy climactic story. And then it was like, and then I got arrested. But it was like, I was on the Capitol steps with some people and we were singing, and like dozens of Tennessee Highway Patrol came out, and they started arresting people. And that day they arrested over 50 people, and like jail is never a good place to be, especially not during a pandemic, and especially not for protesting, because there's a lot of people in there that were not thrilled about what we were doing. And the conditions were not great. And some things took place in there, and I was exposed to mace, and I have asthma, I'm immunocompromised. Anyways, I get out of jail and I had returned to work. Okay, this was in the Tennessee, and my job was like, maybe you want to take another week off, because this was a rough time. And I'm like, I guess, you know what I mean? Like, not understanding like the level of trauma that I went through and what was about to take place, right? So I had taken a couple of days off of work, and I go back. And again, like no days off, focus, focus, focus. And my goal right now is like organizing and stuff at the plaza. That's like the only goal. There's nothing else. Like I'm just focused in on that. And I remember I was texting my mom, and she said something like, do you really think you should still be having breathing issues? Right? Like this mace situation was like a week ago. And she talked me into going to the doctors, which, like I said, we're working. We got stuff to do. We have like a plaza to occupy, Anyway, so I got off work and I went to the doctors, and they're like, crazy story. You have strep and pneumonia. You probably have COVID. and like told them everything that took place at jail. And they're like, yeah, that would checks out, like that's probably what happened. And I've always been like an avid mask wearer, but like things took place and I didn't have a mask on during that time. And so I went home and I remember I went to sleep and I woke up and I had 104 temperature. And after that, it wasn't and then in 14 days, I was good. I left work in July and I didn't go back to work until like beginning of November, I believe. And how sick I got as an uninsured person, of course, has had like lasting effects, but financially, it's not good to get COVID, strep, and pneumonia if you don't have insurance. It's like the worst choice, actually, of all things that could happen. But yeah, I was sick for a really long time. And I think the pressure that was already on me, like at the beginning of 2020 with the pandemic and with George Floyd and with the plaza and everything was just like on top of me, and the process and everything that took place when I was sick was, like I said, a very, very long process. And I'm like an active person. And I was in a position where I like couldn't bring my groceries up the steps, and I couldn't like work out and I like couldn't go downstairs to do laundry. And it was like everything, like my stable, safe life had been like stripped from me. And like most jobs don't pay you to like be off for COVID for months, so financially I'm not doing so hot. But some things took place during this time that made for Radicalized Brew. And what that was is that like my rent was always paid and I always had food on the table. And it makes me emotional, but it was because like community showed up, right? Like if I didn't have community, which a lot of people don't, I don't know what my life would look like right now. But it's like I had people like buy my prescriptions and drop off medicine and stuff. And that was the first time like I allowed for people to do that. And I saw a lot of things like that happening at the plaza before I got sick where like the houseless community like stepped in and they were like holding it down at the plaza. Like that was their space long before it ever belonged to a group of protesters. Like people sleep there and they live there every single night. And they like made sure we were all good and like we're a part of it. And like protesters made sure they were all good, and like there's a lot of really cool stories that come out of the plaza of like houseless folks like being housed, and people getting new jobs and things like that. But again, it's like all these events are happening like right before me. I think my life is ending, but really I'm like getting all this like all these great ideas to start a business, which again was like never the goal. But yeah, recovery was super long. I had to see a specialist for a long time. I'm like still under the doctor's care. And that's like what, 2 years later or something, financially again, bad, bad times. But yeah, so I went back to work and I think I was back at work for maybe like a week and I sat down with that same district manager and another manager. And I just said, it's really hard for me to come in here and serve people lattes when there's people like that don't have a place to live. There's people dying, like all this stuff. Like, how am I supposed to show up and be like, let me make sure I get you this latte when there's like real stuff happening? And I'm like seeing it, like on the streets of Nashville. Like I'm seeing what it's like for people to like not have a place to live and like do all these things. And I don't think I knew what that conversation was going to be, but I was just like, it's really hard, and like a week later, I was leaving work and I was going through like just challenging times with everything. And I texted my store manager and I just said, I can't work right now, and I had like no idea what was going to happen. I was like having a mental health crisis. So I was like, let me like take some time off. Right. And again, like, so I took some time off. I was not well. And as a result of like the plaza and some organizations and stuff, like I said, my rent was paid and I got therapy and I didn't have to like spend a dime. Right. Like, and that's like because of this community from the plaza. And like 48 hours later, I get a text from like a friend who owns like a CBD company here, Swanky Farms, which is like the only CBD company you should buy stuff from. Maybe I'm biased, but they like sent me some money on Venmo. And I had talked about the coffee thing, right? But it was one of those things where it's like, I'm never going to own a business. It's just a cool thing. Like, what if I sold coffee? And I'm like in a crisis, things are not good. And they sent me a Venmo and they were like, start the coffee thing. And like, again, things are not good. I'm taking a break from work because I'm in a crisis. Like I really need to drive that home. It wasn't like, I just need to like take some time and like, figure out my next move. It was like, my whole life is a lie, like what's happening in the world? Like so much like, yeah, it was just a devastating time. And like from that moment on, I started like working on this coffee thing and I started calling like roasters and different companies and like driving to different places and sampling coffee and getting coffee delivered and things like that. And like prior to all this, like I didn't know like photographers or like people who own businesses or anything like that. Like I lived a very like simple life. You know what I mean? I was never like, and let me build a website and get pictures for it, and like what e-commerce platform? Nothing. Shout outs to YouTube. Everything's on there. You can literally do anything from YouTube. And yeah, so I started going on this, and a lot of the people who first bought coffee from me before it even launched were like people from the plaza, right? And I'm like selling it for like dirt cheap, right? Because I'm like, I just need y'all to tell me, does this taste good? Does this look good? Like, are these jars cool? Like, what should I do, right? And it was like the person who made my logo was like, shout outs to Gen Z, like an 18-year-old girl. I think she's in college now for like graphic design, right? Because I don't know anything about making logos, and the first person who took pictures for me was like a photographer who like documented everything at the plaza. Like everything that Radicalized Brew is literally like other people have like showed up and made it happen, right? Like I post stuff, I do the bookkeeping and the deliveries and stuff like that, but everything that like Radicalized Brew has become is like the result of other people. So I'm like leading up to, it was December 11th, I believe. And I'm like, I'm going to like launch this coffee business, right? And I haven't gone back to work. Mind you, I work in the coffee world, right? So I leave, like I'm in crisis. Meanwhile, I'm like, I think I'm going to start a coffee business, And I'm like, I think I'm going to donate 10%, because what I found is I am not a person who can be like out in the streets protesting. It's all the time. It's like not sustainable. It's not good for my mental health. I just can't do it. But I am a person who feels like they need to always be doing something for other people. And like at this time, I had a lot going on, but I was okay and taken care of because I had community. And that's just like not the reality, right? It's like if I didn't have family or community and I got sick and that happened, I would just be out on the streets. Like it's just like a chance, right? That it's like, good thing I had some people who helped me out. And like, good thing there was some like organizations in Nashville that helped me out. And like, I realized like Nashville is rich with like nonprofits and organizations and programs. And I remembered it was like years before I even moved to Nashville. I met this guy, he was houseless, and he was like, I'm going to Nashville. And I'm like, I wasn't thrilled about Nashville at the time. I was like, why are you, of all places to go? And he was like telling me, he was like, that's just where like a lot of houseless people go because they have like all these organizations. And I'm like, that's like a simple conversation. I was going into the gym and I'm thinking about that. And I'm like, so how can we do this so people kind of like end up getting involved in these organizations? And like I said, I'm a person who owns a business, but I'm not like, a lot of people don't like this. I don't like care about like marketing or branding or like anything like that. But I do know that like I have to do some work to get the word out there. So I launch it on December 11th. It's great, right? It's a wonderful thing. And then like, I think like 10 days later or whatever, which this is not something I would normally do, but in the spirit of not playing small, I texted my job back and said, I won't be coming back. And I've never been a person who's done that. I'm always like a 2 weeks notice, maybe a month notice. I got my next job lined up. Everything's safe, secure. I'm still friends with the old boss, all that. And yeah, I was like, I don't think I'm coming back. And I started doing Radicalized Brew with the goal to donate 10% every single month. And that's what we've done. And I say we, it's me, but Radicalized Brew wouldn't exist without all these other people. But yeah, and I started with Radicalized Brew. And for me, everything has been like super organic, right? There aren't these like clear cut, and in 2 years, I want my income from this to be this. It's like, this is just like a way for people to get something they like, really good coffee, and they get to donate money somewhere, right? Everybody likes the idea of donating money, but the only thing better than donating is like also getting something. Like if you ever see those advertisements for different things, it's like donate $7 and get a t-shirt. I'm like, I'll donate $7. Like it'll be a t-shirt I'm never going to wear, but I'm like, you get free stuff, like I think that's great, and I think it's cool too of like, you get to drink some coffee and know that like part of it is going somewhere good. And like with the name Radicalized Brew and like the shirts that we made, it's like in there, it says like shop rad, and it's not like branding, shop Radicalized Brew. It's like a radicalized consumer. What does that look like? It looks like people who spend their money on things where they know where it's going and who they're getting it from. Right. And it's not just like, oh, I swing by and I get this coffee and that's it. It's like, I get to get this coffee delivered to my doorstep. And I know because I got an email when I ordered where it's going, right? And who it's serving. And through that, I've been linked with like so many organizations that I didn't know existed, and it's super simple. Every month on Instagram, I'm just like, who should we donate to? And everyone tags places. And then whoever is the most tagged, we vote for a weekend. And then boom, that's it. And it's like, what's the mission statement of Radicalized Brew? What month is it? You know what I mean? Right now, it's about serving Arabic speaking communities. That's the mission this month. I don't know what it'll be next month, like at all. No clue. And I love that, And sometimes I'll have people be like, have you thought about donating here? It's not up to me. I just like run the Instagram page, and the community is like, we want money going here. And one thing I always think about too with Radicalized Brew is that like I have a lot of people who be like, before you know it, you'll have a shop and you'll have this and you'll have that. And it's like, perhaps, you know what I mean? Maybe I will. But I always have to remind myself that like Radicalized Brew is already like a success. It was a success 30 days in because like I was able to send money off. And like I'll never be able to explain that like first feeling of like, okay, what's 10% of all this? Let me just send it over. Like that's a crazy feeling. And I'd never be able to donate this much money just on my own. In a week, I'll be submitting like the 14th donation, right? Which is like, it's like hard for me to wrap my brain around it, right? And it makes me emotional because I'm like, people are just buying coffee and shirts, and stuff like that. And I get to just send this money over, and like the people in these organizations, like they get to do like the hard work, and we get to make it just like a little bit easier, because I think a lot of people, we want to do better and help our community. We oftentimes don't know how. We don't have a lot of time. We've never done anything like that before, but Nashville has all these organizations that are doing the work. We just like live in a society where like they need money. You know what I mean? Like, again, it's kind of like with me having to register my business. Like I have to. And like it'd be great if everything could just run on, like free. Everything's free, but these organizations, like they need money to do the work that they do. And like I said, like with this month, this is the second time El Mahaba Center has been like voted as a donation recipient. And it's an organization that I didn't even know existed, and it takes place like in an area that I call home, the immigrant quarter of Nashville, which is like an often forgotten part of Nashville. And they run a whole campaign called Save Millwood in order to work on saving that area. And if you're familiar with like Thompson and Millwood, Murfreesboro and Millwood, and then like Murfreesboro and Thompson, that whole area is literally, I refer to it, it's like United Nations. Like when I get paperwork from my landlord, it's in like 10 different languages. Like it's really such a like unique part of Nashville, and it's so forgotten, right? And it's definitely, close to home because it is a place I call home. But prior to Radicalized Brew, I didn't even know this existed, right? I didn't know there was resources for Arabic speaking folks in Nashville, and they do so much to like support all different community members, everything from like tutoring students. Like the owner is incredible, Lydia. She'll be dropping off cribs like on a Saturday that she got for a family that just got to the States and things like that. And it's like, what an amazing thing to be able to do just by like, people buy coffee. I send the money to the people doing the good stuff. And like Radicalized Brew has become something that, I don't think was ever really part of the plan. And I try not to address it as like a business, but it's like, it's just like a new way for people to get involved. And like, one of the things that have taken place from that was not part of the goal is that like people now are like linking resources together in the community, right? It's like, oh, you have an Arabic speaking friend who just moved here. Here's a nonprofit for them. Oh, you like know somebody houseless. They like are dying to get a shower somewhere. Great. There's a place for that. It's like all these different things that we have. Open Table Nashville, all these organizations like do the hard work, and they do it constantly. Like during winter storms, while we're like in our houses all warm and snuggly, like Open Table is out like canvassing the streets, trying to let people know like, hey, Nashville's opening up their winter shelter. Like, do you need to get there? And things like that, that like it's all happening while many of us are just going about our lives, and we don't think about it. And the only time I've ever played any role in picking an organization was the very first one, and it was the Nashville Bail Fund, which, if you're familiar, during Plaza times, like assisted in a lot of people getting released from jail, and that's the only time I played any type of role in choosing, I guess, where the money's going to go. And it's always been Nashville local, except for 1 month. I'm not even exaggerating, like 80 people reach out and they're like, there's a winter storm in Texas. Can we just send money there? So I did a little vote and everybody was like, absolutely. And it was a really cool experience to link up with this organization, Not My Son, who housed like hundreds of people in Texas. And again, these are like a couple of women in like, I think like Dallas, Fort Worth area who got together, started an organization after the murder of George Floyd. And then they had no idea that they'd be housing hundreds of families and getting tutors to come out to like teach these kids while schools are shut down. But yeah, and I don't, when I imagine radicalized brew going on, I'm not like, and then it was global, because it's like, I don't know if it's realistic to imagine everybody in the world supporting Nashville. That's cool. That'd be great. But there are so many other places that need this. And I hope, if anything, that like, radicalized brew can just be like used as an example of like, what's something you're good at that you can do, and then just donate some money, like during Plaza times, I remember everybody talking about like, everybody has something to bring to the table, right? It's like, you're an artist, like you play music, you do coffee, you do whatever, and it's like, how can I use that to like benefit everyone, not just myself? And during Plaza times, I remember being like, I don't know what it is that I can do, like, I don't know. I don't know what it is. What is my thing? And I didn't think it would be coffee. And one thing I always say is like, if I didn't like coffee, I don't know, if I was like a quilter, shout outs to all the quilters, it'd be like radicalized quilts. And I just make quilts and donate money. But it's like, coffee is really just like the vehicle that allows me to do like the work that I want to do, right? It's like, I like to say radicalized brew is like in the business of people. We just happen to sell, I think it's pretty good coffee. But yeah, it's like, and that's just like the vehicle I use to get those funds where they need to go. And if anything, I hope people can see something like that and not only think like, maybe I should start a business, but like whatever it is. Like, I don't think everybody needs to start a business. I don't really, maybe everybody shouldn't start a business. You know what I mean? We do that a lot here, but I just think that like when people see radicalized brew, my hope is that they'll think maybe I should like stop playing small too, right? Like this little dream that I have, like that could actually be a real thing. Like, I don't have to spend my whole entire life saying, yeah, it'd be cool to sell coffee. It's like, so do it, whatever it is. And I just had never thought in those terms. I was always very like practical, black and white. It's like, these are the steps to get here. It was never quit your job, start a business, donate the money to the people, and like, I have other jobs and things that I do to like support myself. And it's like, I was able to spend 6 months doing it full time. And then life happened again. Don't get COVID uninsured. Don't get COVID, but uninsured. It's the worst time. And like getting a new car and stuff like that. But I'm like, I got like a good 6 months almost of my life to just focus on radicalized brew. And it's like, and perhaps I'll be full-time doing radicalized brew again. And perhaps I never will be. But I hope that radicalized brew is forever in the way of, I always have this thing going on, right? I always have this opportunity to send money off to these organizations and to learn about organizations. And I just hope things continue to happen organically. No branding, no marketing, no like 5-year plans. I'm just like, drink coffee, give money to people. And I feel like that's like a sweet setup. I'm pretty low maintenance. That's all I ask for. So I don't know what time it is, right? Oh, whoa, impeccable timing. Wow. Well, that's all. Thank you, guys. She was like, stop at 9:45. It's 9:45.
I know. But you're not quite done yet, because if people want to ask questions, that's why we have these 15 minutes.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
But yeah, that was impeccable timing.
Wow.
And thank you, first of all, for speaking and sharing all of this story and reminding everyone just how much they're capable of with the things that you're good at, and how it's so much more simple, honestly, to be like, yeah. I can do a thing. I can
I can do a thing. Yeah.
Just a little bit. So if anyone has any questions for Xtiana, we can pass the mic around. Yeah.
Oh
no. Outside of any or outside of just like buying coffee, how can we help you? How can like people around
sharing? I know it's the most typical thing on social media, but really like sharing posts, liking posts, and also like tagging organizations. It always seems like if nobody starts the tagging, it like doesn't start. But as soon as one person starts, they're like, I think money should go here. Some of these organizations like go hard, they'll have like 20 plus people on their team sharing stuff. And when that happens, it's like way more exciting, right? Because it's not just like, oh, there's 3 organizations and there's like 35 votes for one and 2 for the other. So you can find us on Instagram. It's Radicalized Brew. You can find us on Facebook, but Facebook is just not it for getting like, I don't even like post on there, but it's on there. And then also if you just Google Radicalized Brew, the Shopify store will come up. But Instagram is like where the voting takes place, where people tag organizations, where everything happens. So really just liking and sharing things like that helps quite a bit. Yeah.
All right. What other questions? You got some coming in from the chat.
Oh, the chat. Oh my goodness. I forgot.
Yeah. Courtney from, hang on, let me take out my earbud. It's like echoing. Courtney from Snail Mail Social Club says, question, can we be friends?
Oh my,
Also,
yeah.
Snail Mail Social Club wants to know if there's a mailing address for Radicalized Brew.
There is. Oh my goodness. Wow. Courtney. Yeah. Courtney's a good name. I got a lot of Courtneys historically that have been good friends of mine. Add me on Instagram, your girl Xtiana. Yeah, do you want me to just say it? If you guys want to like write me, it's PO Box 17286, I believe. Let me make sure. I don't like, mail stuff a lot. I literally just have a PO box. So if I send you a shirt to the wrong address, it'll come back to me. Where's my wallet? I have a card in there. It's not even on there. I feel pretty confident of that. I turn my phone off, to focus. I'm turning it back on. It's on the website if somebody wants to look it up. It's at the very bottom, but I'm pretty sure it's PO Box 17286, Nashville, Tennessee 37217. I feel confident about that. But nobody, that's so great. Wow. This is the first time I've given out the PO Box. It's usually just like a return to sender thing. So it's like pretty exciting.
All right.
Is that right? 17286. Wow. I should never doubt myself. My apologies.
Oh, okay. All right. Any other questions from the crowd? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tom. I have a question about just like hearing your story. It sounds like one part that really like landed with me was kind of like never knowing that a lot of these resources existed for houseless people, and like during the Plaza times really got connected and I don't know, found out about all these things that were out there that you didn't know about, which is awesome. Is there like anywhere like to find those resources or like a hub of information? Or in like second part of the question is like, why do you think nobody knows about this? And like, what can we do to like, I don't know, build more of like a network or something like that besides like starting a business like you are?
Such a good question. So originally my plan was to bring everybody these books from Open Table Nashville that have like every nonprofit and organization in Nashville. They're sold out because they're so good. But there's a lot of different sponsors for this booklet, but if you go to Where to Turn in Nashville, it'll come up with the website, and keep eyes on that. And it'll tell you when they restock. And it's like a little yellow book. They update it every single year. It has like a table of contents, and it's like an endless list of like organizations. And you look like, are you looking for like houseless resources, substance abuse, like food insecurity, everything like that? It's like the most underappreciated resource we have. And like they did it for us, right? And I keep it in my car. I have one at home. Like I always have a little booklet on me. So I can always, if I see somebody or anything like that, like I can always refer them, and it's been really cool. Different situations I've been in where I'm like, let's look it up, And then what was the second question? I got so excited about that.
I guess I'm kind of just like wondering, like for somebody like me, and like sounds like you and your previous, like before 2020, it's just like head down, working on like my own things, got like stuff going on. So like I wouldn't know about these organizations existing. And like, besides like I can support Radicalized Brew. And I know that part of like what I'm spending money on will go to like a good cause. But like for somebody who's head down and like for all these organizations that exist, like how can we like, I don't know, promote a better like understanding that these resources are there, or like, I don't know. I guess I'm just like wondering, why haven't I heard of it? If my head's down, like besides personally like trying to be more open to it? Like, is there a way for like these industries to connect more or something like that? Or I guess it's more like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think like when there's been different organizations that I've partnered with and I feel like they have like a huge following, if you will, it's really just been because like whoever supports them, like really supports them. Like I've partnered with some organizations and are like diehard supporters of whatever the organization is. And I think like, you know, you can only spend so much time and energy, I imagine, as like like any type of owner of like a nonprofit organization, like getting the word out, because I feel like a lot of people who get into that work, they're like focused on doing the work, right? And they're like, and hopefully people like hear about it, but I'm going to be like on the ground doing the work. And I think it really a lot of times comes down to us, right? It's like we hear about an organization and we start promoting it and we bring it up. And like a lot of the organizations that I know about, it's just from like word of mouth, right? Like I said with El Mahaba Center, never knew that existed. And it's like very local to me. And I think it really just comes down to us like really like gassing these places up and being like, look at this, you know, like look at this amazing thing that's happening in Nashville. Like we have like a literacy organization here and it's ran by volunteers, you know, and it's like, you know, somebody who like wants to become more literate, they can go there. And I think it just, I don't know, some people might not feel that way, but I think the responsibility like falls on us a lot to like get this message out there, you know, because we can like Google and research organizations and stuff like that. But like when the information is presented to us by someone we trust or we know, we're like, great, right? You know what I mean? Like we understand that. But yeah, I think we just got to do our part in promoting these. So these organizations doing the work can focus on the work while we're like on social media or in the streets, like, oh my God, Path Nashville. You know what I mean? Like, do you know about this? Like, that's just what I think though. So yeah, and get the booklet, Where to Turn Nashville, whenever it's available again.
Yeah, the booklet's being reprinted in May, and so we're already on alert, so that we'll have them available at Creative Mornings in the future. Because in the same vein of you know, it's our responsibility to be sharing things like, obviously our numbers aren't as great as they were before COVID, but by having a platform like this, like where we can connect with other people and bring people together, we can be a place to share those things. So like where are your spaces that you have lots of people available to you that and you have their ear because you sent them a Zoom link or you have a microphone in your hand. Like, and so we're going to try and make that available as soon as those books are back.
Yay, booklets.
Yay, booklets. Any other questions?
Was there any resolution to the experience that you had in the plaza? Like, and I want to know, because we're talking a lot about grassroots, you know, movement, but in order to essentially connect with, you know, the leaders and politicians, what's the best way that you found, and how are people continuing to go about that work of moving our leaders to kind of take notice of these things that need to change?
I think, in my opinion, like with like proper grassroots organization, it takes these nonprofits like getting together to do things. Like I know a lot of the people like in my circle, myself included, we get like fired up to start a new nonprofit. But oftentimes I think we need to like take a step back, see what's already there and say like, maybe we can like get this all together. You know, like one of the last things that the Plaza did after the Plaza was done is get together with Never Again Tennessee, which I believe, I don't know if everybody like on their board is Jewish, but it's basically talking about never again in regards to like the Holocaust. And they do a lot of work in like today's times about ensuring that there aren't like further acts of like discrimination that could potentially lead, you know, to something as horrible as like, you know, acts of genocide, you know, because historically there are things that take place that allow us to get to a point where these things happen. But I really think like finding an organization, whatever it is that like you support, following their lead and linking up with other organizations. Cause like the Plaza is like great at holding space for 62 days. Like the people who like, we can hold some space and stay there, you know, through like rain and heat and arrest and things like that. But like, it can be hard to be like, how do we like type up, you know, we were putting out statements, you know, how do we like create like a campaign for people to call in and say like, hey, take this statue out. But like, there's always organizations that are already doing that. And when those like 2 or 3 or however many link up, I feel like we can make it happen, right? Like we don't have to be good at everything. Like I'm not good at starting a phone campaign, right? And like making these templates to like right into your city council person, but I'm really good at sharing and talking and like hyping organizations up and things like that. But yeah, I think it's just seeing what organizations are out there and following in their lead, you know, and like with Black Nashville Assembly, there's lots of organizations here that do a really good job, like holding elected officials accountable and also educating the public in a way that we understand. Because I don't know if you've ever sat in like a budget meeting or like anything, like I'll go, but I don't know how much of it I'm like retaining or even like fully understanding. So like Black Nashville Assembly and stuff like does a really good job of being like, and this is what that means, you know? And same thing like with Gideon's Army and like different organizations that like take what's going on in the world and like explain it to people and show like real ways that we can like hold people accountable. So yeah, I think it like we need all roles filled, right? Like we need people who will hold signs and we need people who will show up on the Hill and people who will call their elected officials and be like, this ain't it, babe. Yeah. So that's that, you know.
Do we have any other questions before we say goodbye today? That's okay. So I hope everybody leaves this morning feeling, oh yeah, it's on, feeling really motivated and excited and inspired for the world that we're part of. And, you know, that you want to work things into conversation that need to be said, things that we can talk about and share and just keep building up all the connectedness that we can to help everybody be their best way. So thanks for being here this morning, guys, and take your trash and take the bananas and the clementines and refill your coffees before you go, because I can't keep making banana bread or having coffee spill in the car. So yeah, go, go, go. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Yay. You should get one of those prints. We should get those prints.